months. 16 days of standing at Station 47, feeding raw plasteel into the hungry maw of pattern generator Kappa 9. 7 years of the same ritual. Wake at the 19th hour, consume ration paste, walk 14 minutes to the factory floor, stand, feed, listen to the machine's endless grinding song. The factory stretched beyond sight in both directions, a cathedral of industry where 10,000 souls performed their daily genuflection to the machine god. Steam hissed from overhead pipes in irregular bursts, creating a percussion that matched our movements. The air tasted of metal shavings and recycled breath. My hands had long since grown calloused from handling the rough plasteel sheets, and my back had learned to accommodate the slight hunch required to work comfortably at my station height. Station 47 sat in the middle of production line Alpha 7, surrounded by identical workstations manned by identical workers. To my left stood Jorik, a thin man whose nervous habit of counting aloud under his breath had become as familiar as the machine noise. To my right worked Mela, whose silence was so complete I sometimes wondered if she had forgotten how to speak. We never spoke of our lives before the manufactorum. There seemed little point. The work consumed all available thought and energy, leaving nothing for memory or hope. The overseer's voice crackled through the voxcasters at precisely the same moment each shift. Production quota stands at 97% of target. Unacceptable. Increase output by 12% or face ration reduction. The threat carried no malice, only the mechanical certainty of bureaucratic process. We had heard the same announcement for 3 weeks running. The quotas always climbed, they never fell. I had adapted to this rhythm completely. My body moved without conscious direction, hands guiding plasteel into the machine's intake while my mind wandered through familiar paths. Sometimes I remembered the taste of real meat, though the memory had grown vague and possibly false. Sometimes I imagined colors brighter than the manufactorum's perpetual rust-orange illumination. These thoughts came and went like distant ships on a dark horizon, visible for moments before disappearing into the greater darkness. The work was not difficult, merely endless. The machine required plasteel sheets fed at precise intervals, neither too fast nor too slow. Too fast and the pattern generator would jam, resulting in work stoppage and punishment detail. Too slow and the quota would slip, bringing the same result. 7 years had taught me the exact rhythm: feed. Count 3 seconds, feed. Count 3 seconds. The pattern never varied. Around me, 9,999 other workers performed their own variations of the same dance. The sound created a hypnotic symphony of industrial devotion, metal against metal. Steam releasing pressure, conveyor belts carrying finished products toward distant shipping bays, the occasional curse when someone broke rhythm and earned a shock from their compliance collar. These sounds had become the texture of reality itself. I cannot say I was unhappy during those years. Happiness seemed a concept from another universe, irrelevant to the business of survival. I was fed. I was housed in Worker Barracks Delta 7, Level 3, Cell 941. I possessed regulation coveralls, regulation boots, and regulation identification tags. My existence had structure and purpose. The Imperium provided, as the daily prayer reminded us, and in return we gave our labor gladly. The prayer came at the shift's midpoint, broadcast through every Vox speaker in the facility. 10,000 voices would join in mechanical recitation. Blessed is the machine, for it serves the Emperor. Blessed is the worker, for we serve the machine. Blessed is our service, for through toil comes redemption. The words had worn smooth through repetition, losing meaning but gaining the comfort of routine. I spoke them without thinking, as natural as breathing. My cell in the worker barracks measured 2 meters by 3 meters. It contained a sleeping cot, a small storage compartment, and a waste receptacle. The walls were unpainted rockcrete, stained by decades of human habitation. A single lumen strip provided illumination when needed. I shared the cell with no one, a privilege earned through years of perfect compliance and production record. Most workers were housed in groups of 3 or 4. Solitude was a luxury in the underhive. The food was adequate. Ration paste provided necessary calories and nutrients, flavored weekly with different chemical additives. Monday brought artificial fruit essence. Tuesday was synthetic meat flavor. Wednesday through Sunday cycled through variations too subtle to distinguish. I had grown to prefer the unflavored base paste, finding the artificial tastes more unsettling than simple blandness. The paste came from great vats tended by dedicated nutrition servitors, dispensed through automated feeding stations throughout the complex. Recreation time lasted 2 hours per cycle. Most workers spent this time in the communal areas, playing simple games with worn cards or dice fashioned from scrap metal. Some gathered to listen as the more educated read from approved texts, usually technical manuals or devotional literature. I preferred to return to my cell and lie still, listening to the sounds of the hive settling around us. Even in the depths of the industrial sector, life continued its ancient patterns. Rats scurried through wall spaces, water dripped from corroded pipes, distant machinery hummed with tireless purpose. Sleep came easily in those days. Physical exhaustion ensured rest, and the darkness of the barracks created peace. Dreams, when they came, were simple things. Sometimes I walked through spaces larger than the manufactorum, under skies I had never seen but somehow remembered. Sometimes faces appeared, people whose names and relationships had been lost to time but whose presence brought warmth. These dreams faded quickly upon waking, leaving only the faint impression of something missed but not mourned. The routine had become perfect after 7 years. I knew exactly how many steps lay between my cell and the factory floor. I knew which corridor maintenance servitors followed predictable schedules that could be avoided. I knew the optimal timing for visiting the washing facilities to avoid crowds. Every aspect of existence had been reduced to efficient patterns that minimized friction and maximized the energy available for work. Change seemed impossible in such a place. The manufactorum had existed for centuries before my arrival and would continue for centuries after my departure, whenever that might come. Workers who grew too old or infirm were quietly transferred to other duties, though no one spoke of where they went or what became of them. New workers arrived regularly to fill empty stations, usually young people from the upper levels who had somehow failed to secure better positions. They learned the rhythm quickly or they disappeared. I had no reason to expect that anything would ever change. The Imperium was vast beyond comprehension, and my place within it was smaller than a single grain of sand. I was a worker at Station 47 on production line Alpha 7 in Manufactorum Tertius of Hive Tertius on a world whose name I had forgotten. My entire universe consisted of the factory, the barracks, and the corridors connecting them. This seemed not just acceptable but natural. The morning everything changed began with the same ritual awakening. The harsh tone of the shift klaxon penetrated sleep at precisely the 19th hour. I rose immediately, a response trained into my muscles through years of repetition. The regulation coveralls went on first, then the boots, then the identification tags around my neck. The small mirror above the storage compartment showed a face I barely recognized as my own anymore, weathered by industrial air and marked by the subtle signs of extended exposure to chemical processes. The walk to the factory floor followed its familiar path, down 3 levels via the cargo lifts, through corridor Gamma Prime, past the shrine to the machine god where incense burned continuously before an ancient cogitator housing. Left turn at Junction 7, right at Junction 12, straight through the final checkpoint where servitors scanned our identification tags with mechanical precision. The same route every day for 7 years, 3 months and 16 days. Station 47 waited exactly as I had left it 8 hours earlier. The plasteel sheets sat in neat stacks beside the machine intake. The pattern generator hummed with quiet readiness. The control panel displayed the familiar sequence of green lights indicating proper function. Everything in its place, ready for another cycle of productive service to the Imperium. Jorik had already begun his work, counting softly under his breath as he fed his own machine. 47, 48, 49. 50. His daily count would reach into the thousands before shift end. Mela stood silent at her station, moving with the mechanical precision that had made her the line's most efficient worker for 3 consecutive years. The overseer's platform remained empty, though surveillance servitors tracked our movements with tireless attention. The first hour passed exactly as expected. Feed the machine, count 3 seconds. Feed the machine, count 3 seconds. The rhythm synchronized with my heartbeat, creating a meditation that made time flow without notice. Steam hissed from the overhead pipes. The pattern generator's grinding song provided steady accompaniment. The familiar ache began to build in my lower back, a signal that my body was settling into the day's work. It was during the second hour that the disruption began. The sound came first, filtering through the factory's constant noise like a discordant note in a familiar symphony. Marching feet in perfect synchronization, moving with military precision through corridors designed for industrial traffic, the sound grew closer, accompanied by voices barking orders in the clipped tones of authority. Workers began to look up from their stations, breaking rhythm for the first time in memory. The overseer appeared on his platform ahead of schedule, flanked by figures I had never seen before. They wore the dark blue uniforms of the Planetary Defense Force, with silver insignia indicating officers of significant rank. Their presence transformed the factory floor into something alien and threatening. Workers who had stood confidently at their stations for years suddenly seemed small and vulnerable. The Vox speakers crackled with an announcement that would reshape everything. Attention all workers. By decree of the planetary governor and in accordance with imperial military conscription protocols, the following individuals will report immediately to Processing Station Alpha for induction into military service. Names began to echo through the vast space. Each one struck like a physical blow, separating another soul from the familiar safety of industrial routine. Workers stepped away from their machines as their names were called, moving with the same mechanical obedience they had shown to production quotas, but their faces carried a new expression. Fear mixed with confusion and the terrible understanding that their small, predictable world was ending. Jorik Yelen, Station 46, Alpha 7. The thin man beside me stopped counting mid-number, his mouth hanging open in surprise. For 7 years, his voice had provided constant background noise, marking time with obsessive precision. Now silence replaced his familiar litany. Mela Korath, Station 48, Alpha 7. The quiet woman to my right stepped back from her machine, her perfect efficiency suddenly meaningless. In 3 years I had never heard her speak, but now she whispered something too soft to understand. The list continued. Names from every section, every level of skill and experience. Workers who had served for decades stood alongside those who had arrived only months before. The selection followed no pattern I could identify, not age, not performance record, not health status. The choices seemed random, governed by needs and calculations far beyond my understanding. Marcus Kellyan, Station 47, Alpha 7. The sound of my own name struck with the force of revelation. After 7 years, 3 months, and 16 days of invisible existence, I had been selected for notice. The machine at Station 47 suddenly seemed foreign, as if I had never seen it before. The plasteel sheets I had been about to feed became objects from another life. I stepped back from the station, following the example of those called before me. The movement felt wrong, a violation of natural law. For years I had stood in this exact spot, performing this exact function. Now I was walking away, and someone else would eventually take my place. The thought carried a weight I could not fully comprehend. Processing Station Alpha occupied a section of the factory I had never seen before. The cold workers were herded through corridors that led away from the production floor, past administrative offices where bureaucrats managed the endless paperwork of industrial efficiency. The walls here were painted regulation green instead of rust orange, and the air carried different scents. Cleaning solutions, ink, fear. The processing station itself was a large room filled with metal tables and scanning equipment. PDF officers moved between the tables with practiced efficiency, conducting examinations that reduced human beings to lists of capabilities and deficiencies. Height, weight, basic health assessment, literacy level, mechanical aptitude. Each measurement was recorded with the same dispassionate precision used for inventory management. I found myself assigned to Table 17, overseen by a woman whose uniform identified her as Sergeant Major Vex. Her face carried the weathered look of someone who had processed thousands of conscripts over many years. She spoke without looking up from her data slate, asking questions in a tone that expected immediate compliance. Full name: Marcus Kellion. Age. I had to think for a moment. Time in the manufactorum was measured by shifts and quotas, not birthdays or anniversaries. 28 standard years. Previous military service? None. Specialized skills. Factory work. Pattern generator operation. She made notations on the slate, occasionally glancing up to assess some physical characteristic. The questions continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Family status, which I no longer had. Educational background, which was minimal. Health issues, which were few. Each answer narrowed the possibilities of what would become of me. The medical examination followed immediately. A servitor equipped with scanning devices conducted tests I did not understand, measuring responses to stimuli and recording data on organs and systems I could not see. The process was impersonal in the way that all imperial bureaucracy was impersonal, reducing individuals to component parts that could be catalogued and utilized. Physically suitable for standard infantry service, the servitor announced in its mechanical voice. Recommended assignment: frontline combat unit, siege warfare specialization. The words meant nothing to me then. I had heard of the Imperial Guard from propaganda broadcasts and recruitment posters, but the reality of military service existed in a realm completely separate from factory work. The examination continued with tests of basic knowledge and reaction time, all conducted with the same efficient indifference. Around me, other workers were undergoing identical processing. Some were declared unsuitable for combat roles and assigned to support functions. Others were marked for specialized training in technical fields. A few were rejected entirely for health reasons and returned to their stations with visible relief. The majority, like myself, were channeled toward the great machine of imperial warfare. The entire process took less than 4 hours. 4 hours to dismantle a life that had taken 7 years to build, to redirect a human being from industrial production to military service. The efficiency was remarkable in its way, a testament to the Imperium's ability to mobilize resources when necessity demanded. Individual preferences and attachments were irrelevant obstacles to be processed away. By the end of the processing, we were no longer workers. We had become conscripts, assigned identification numbers and basic classification codes that would determine our immediate future. I was now conscript 4,471,892 Delta Infantry classification pending assignment. The name Marcus Kellion remained, but it felt like something that belonged to someone else. The final stage of processing involved the issuance of basic military equipment: a cloth bag containing regulation undergarments, a water bottle, a small eating kit, and a booklet titled Basic Military Doctrine for New Conscripts. The booklet was thin and printed on cheap paper that smudged easily. Its pages contained information about military hierarchy, basic orders, and simple diagrams of proper standing positions. We were also given identification tags to replace our worker badges. The new tags were heavier and made of different metal, stamped with our conscript numbers and basic service information. They felt foreign hanging around my neck, a constant reminder that my old identity had been officially terminated. The officer in charge of final processing was a captain whose name I never learned. He addressed our group with the practiced efficiency of someone who had given the same speech countless times before. "You are now property of the Imperial Guard," he announced. "Your previous lives are ended. Your service begins immediately." You will be transported to Training Facility Gamma for basic combat preparation, after which you will be assigned to active units based on military necessity. Questions will not be answered. Compliance is expected and will be enforced. The speech lasted less than 2 minutes. 2 minutes to explain that everything familiar had been stripped away and replaced with obligations I did not understand. We stood in formation, 53 former workers now transformed into military resources, waiting for instructions that would determine whether we lived or died. The transport arrived within an hour. A massive ground vehicle designed to carry troops efficiently rather than comfortably, with bench seating along both sides and no windows. The engine produced a deep rumbling that made conversation difficult, which seemed to be its purpose. Conscripts were not expected to discuss their situation or form relationships that might interfere with military discipline. I found a seat near the front of the vehicle, between a young man who had worked in the upper hive's atmospheric processing systems and an older woman whose scarred hands suggested work with dangerous machinery. Neither spoke during the journey, and I found myself equally disinclined to conversation. The reality of what had happened required time to process, and words seemed inadequate to the task. The manufactorum disappeared behind us as the transport climbed toward the upper levels of the hive. Through the small vision port near the driver's compartment, I caught glimpses of sections I had never seen before. Residential areas where families lived in actual houses rather than barracks cells. Commercial districts where goods were sold rather than produced. Administrative zones where the complex business of governing a hive city took place. The sight of these places created an unexpected emotion. Not longing exactly, because I had never desired to live differently. Something more like recognition, the understanding that other ways of existence were possible and that I had never been offered the chance to explore them. For 7 years I had accepted that factory work represented the natural order of my life. Now, seeing alternatives, that acceptance felt like a kind of blindness. The journey to Training Facility Gamma took 6 hours. The transport followed highways that climbed steadily through the hive's levels, past industrial zones and residential sectors, through checkpoint after checkpoint where our documentation was verified by board guards. The higher we climbed, the better the air became, though it never lost the recycled taste that marked all hive atmosphere. Training Facility Gamma sat on the hive's exterior surface, a complex of low buildings surrounded by high walls topped with razor wire. Guard towers provided overlapping fields of fire across the entire area. The architecture was purely functional, designed to contain large numbers of people efficiently while providing easy surveillance and control. There was no attempt at beauty or comfort. The processing here was even more thorough than at the factory. We were stripped, decontaminated, and issued uniforms that fit poorly but adequately. The regulation Imperial Guard fatigues were rough canvas-dyed military green, with boots that would require breaking in and equipment belts that sat awkwardly on hips accustomed to worker coveralls. Our personal possessions were confiscated and stored, to be returned upon completion of service. This policy struck me as optimistic, given what little I knew about Imperial Guard survival rates. The small collection of items from my cell, a worn prayer book, a few photographs whose subjects I could no longer identify, and a mechanical timepiece that had belonged to my father, disappeared into a storage locker labeled with my conscript number. The barracks were designed for 60 conscripts, arranged in 3 long rows of bunks with personal storage compartments underneath. The space felt larger than what I was accustomed to, but the presence of so many other people created a different kind of confinement. Privacy became impossible. Every sound, every movement, every personal habit was exposed to constant observation. My assigned bunk sat near the center of the middle row, surrounded by conscripts drawn from across the hive's industrial sectors. The man above me had worked in water reclamation. The woman across the aisle had maintained air circulation systems. To my left was a former food processing worker whose knowledge of nutrition would prove valuable in the weeks to come. We were a cross-section of the hive's productive capacity, now redirected toward destruction. The first night in military barracks was sleepless. The sounds were wrong. Instead of the familiar industrial hum that had provided the soundtrack to 7 years of rest, I heard voices, breathing, the rustle of unfamiliar fabrics. The air carried scents of too many bodies in close proximity, overlaid with the chemical smell of military cleaning solutions. Even the darkness felt different, broken by safety lights and the occasional flash of patrol searchlights through barred windows. I lay on the thin mattress and tried to comprehend what had happened. 18 hours earlier, I had been a worker with a defined role and predictable future. Now, I was a conscript preparing for training in skills whose purpose was killing and dying. The transition seemed too sudden to be real, but the rough canvas of the military-issue blanket against my skin provided constant proof. Around me, other conscripts dealt with the change in their own ways. Some wept quietly into their pillows, mourning the loss of familiar routines. Others lay still and silent, perhaps trying to preserve energy for whatever trials awaited. A few whispered conversations about homes and families they had left behind, creating connections that military discipline would eventually discourage or destroy. The fear was universal, though it expressed itself differently in each person. Fear of the unknown training that would begin tomorrow, fear of the combat assignments that would follow, fear of death in service to an imperium that had noticed our existence only to demand our sacrifice. The fear was rational and appropriate, but it offered no comfort or guidance. Sleep came eventually, born of exhaustion rather than peace. Dreams, when they arrived, were chaotic mixtures of factory routine and military imagery drawn from propaganda posters. I stood at Station 47 feeding ammunition into weapons I had never seen. I marched through corridors that led to battlefields instead of production lines. I wore uniforms that shifted between worker coveralls and soldier fatigues without logic or warning. Morning arrived with the harsh sound of wake-up klaxons, similar to factory shift changes but somehow more aggressive. The conscripts stirred to life with varying degrees of alertness, some rising immediately while others required repeated prompting from early risers who had already internalized the expectation of rapid response. The barracks filled with the sounds of 59 people attempting to dress, wash, and prepare for the day simultaneously. The washing facilities were communal and basic: cold water, harsh soap, and minimal privacy. The mirrors were polished metal rather than glass, providing distorted reflections that made everyone look unfamiliar. I found myself studying the face that looked back, trying to recognize the factory worker I had been in the conscript I was becoming. Breakfast was served in a large dining hall adjacent to the barracks complex. The food was similar to factory rations but presented differently, served on metal trays by kitchen staff who moved with military efficiency. Protein paste, carbohydrate wafers, vitamin supplements, and a bitter drink that might have been stimulant tea. The taste was familiar, but the context made everything seem foreign. We ate in silence, following the example of conscripts who had arrived earlier and learned the unspoken rules. Conversation during meals was discouraged by the presence of training sergeants who watched for signs of insubordination or excessive familiarity between conscripts. The message was clear: we were individuals being processed into components of a military machine, and personal relationships would only interfere with that transformation. The training staff arrived as we finished eating. 3 sergeants and a lieutenant, all bearing the weathered appearance of career military personnel who had survived long enough to earn training assignments. Their uniforms were perfectly maintained, their equipment showed signs of extensive use, and their bearing suggested competence earned through experience rather than classroom instruction. Lieutenant Herrick addressed our group with the same dispassionate efficiency that had marked every stage of military processing. You are now beginning basic combat training. This training will last 6 weeks and will prepare you for assignment to active guard units. You will learn to follow orders without question. You will learn to use weapons effectively. You will learn to survive in combat environments. Many of you will not complete this training successfully. Those who fail will be reassigned to support roles or return to civilian status with appropriate notation in your permanent records. The speech continued with details about daily schedules, behavioral expectations, and the consequences of various infractions. The information was practical and clearly presented, but it carried an underlying message about the reality of our situation. We were raw material being shaped into useful tools, and tools that failed to meet specifications would be discarded or repurposed. Training began immediately after the orientation. We were marched to an equipment shed where we received the tools of infantry warfare, las-rifles, simple but effective energy weapons that had armed guard units for millennia. Power packs, cleaning kits, basic maintenance tools, and instruction manuals written in the simplified language used for training conscripts with limited education. The las-rifle felt strange in my hands, heavier than any tool I had used in factory work, but balanced differently, with weight distributed to facilitate quick aiming and firing. The weapon was well used but properly maintained, showing signs of service in previous hands while remaining fully functional. A small metal plate near the stock bore inscription marks, scratched letters that might have been names or unit identifications. Sergeant Vex, the same woman who had processed me at the factory, handled basic weapons instruction. She demonstrated proper handling, loading procedures, safety protocols, and basic maintenance with the kind of competence that suggested years of experience. Her explanations were clear and practical, focused on keeping the weapon functional rather than understanding its technical principles. This las-rifle will keep you alive if you maintain it properly and use it correctly, she explained, field stripping the weapon with practiced efficiency. It will kill you if you treat it carelessly or ignore proper procedures. The choice is entirely yours, and you will live or die with the consequences. The first day of weapons training was devoted entirely to handling and maintenance. We learned to disassemble the las-rifle completely, clean each component, identify signs of wear or damage, and reassemble everything in proper working order. The process required attention to detail and manual dexterity, skills that translated well from factory work. I found the training surprisingly familiar. Like operating the pattern generator, maintaining a las-rifle required following specific procedures in the correct sequence. Feed, count 3 seconds. Feed, count 3 seconds. Disassemble, clean, inspect, reassemble. The rhythm was different, but the underlying principle of disciplined repetition remained the same. Other aspects of training proved more challenging. Physical conditioning had not been necessary for factory work beyond the basic fitness required to stand for long periods and lift moderate weights. Military training demanded different capabilities: running, climbing, carrying heavy loads over distance, and maintaining physical performance while under stress. The training complex included obstacle courses designed to simulate combat environments, barriers to climb over, trenches to navigate, areas of broken ground that required careful foot placement. We spent hours each day moving through these courses, first individually to learn the techniques, then in groups to develop teamwork and coordination. My body adapted slowly to the new demands. Muscles that had been sufficient for factory work proved inadequate for military requirements. Calluses in familiar places were joined by new ones in unfamiliar locations. The persistent ache in my lower back was replaced by pains in shoulders, legs, and joints that had never been tested by extended physical effort. The other conscripts were adapting at different rates. Those who had performed physical labor in their previous lives adjusted quickly to the conditioning requirements. Others, particularly workers from the upper hive's clerical and administrative sectors, struggled with basic fitness standards. A few were transferred to support roles after failing to meet minimum physical requirements. Their military careers redirected before they had properly begun. Combat training began in the second week. We learned basic tactics for infantry warfare, how to move as a unit, how to use cover effectively, how to coordinate fire with other squad members. The instruction was practical rather than theoretical, focused on techniques that would keep us alive long enough to be useful, rather than comprehensive understanding of military strategy. Sergeant Korath handled most of the tactical instruction. A thin man whose uniform bore campaign ribbons from conflicts I had never heard of. He taught with the kind of weary competence that suggested he had seen the results of good and bad training in actual combat. His lessons carried an urgency that the factory's production quotas had never possessed. "The enemy will try to kill you," he explained during a lesson on defensive positioning. "This is not personal. It is not because they hate you or because you have wronged them. It is because you wear the uniform of the Imperial Guard and they serve the enemies of the Imperium. Your survival depends entirely on killing them first, and killing them more efficiently than they can kill you." The training weapons fired low-powered laser bursts that stung but did not cause permanent injury. We practiced shooting at static targets first, learning proper stance, breathing techniques, and trigger control. The las rifle's simple design made marksmanship relatively straightforward, but consistency required practice and concentration. I discovered that I had some aptitude for shooting. 7 years of precise manual work had developed steady hands and the ability to focus attention on small details. The rhythm of aimed fire resembled the rhythm of factory work in some ways, requiring consistent repetition of practiced movements while maintaining quality standards. Target practice progressed from static shooting to more complex scenarios. Moving targets, targets that appeared briefly before disappearing, shooting while moving, shooting while under simulated stress, with training sergeants shouting orders and creating distractions designed to test our ability to maintain performance under pressure. The most difficult aspect of weapons training was learning to shoot at human-shaped targets. The transition from metal plates and simple geometric shapes to silhouettes that resembled people created unexpected psychological resistance. Even knowing that the targets were harmless training aids, something in my mind resisted the act of aiming at a human form and pulling the trigger. Sergeant Vex addressed this hesitation during an individual instruction session. "The enemy will not hesitate to kill you," she said, watching as I struggled with a human silhouette target. "They will not consider your feelings or your moral qualms. They will not give you time to overcome psychological barriers. If you cannot shoot at a training target that looks like a person, you will not be able to shoot at actual enemies when they are trying to end your life." She was correct, of course. The training was designed to prepare us for realities that civilian life had not anticipated. The ability to take human life was a required skill for infantry soldiers, just as operating machinery had been a required skill for factory workers. The moral implications were irrelevant to immediate survival. I learned to shoot at human-shaped targets by focusing on technical aspects rather than emotional ones. Sight alignment, breathing control, trigger squeeze. The target became a problem to be solved rather than a representation of a person. This mental compartmentalization felt wrong, but it was necessary for successful completion of training. Group tactics training began in the 3rd week. We were organized into squads of 10 conscripts each, with temporary squad leaders selected based on performance during individual instruction. My squad included workers from various hive sectors, creating a mix of backgrounds and capabilities that reflected the Guard's practice of drawing soldiers from across Imperial society. Squad movement was more complex than individual combat techniques. We learned to advance while maintaining mutual support, to coordinate our fire to suppress enemy positions, to move wounded squad members to safety while continuing combat operations. The training scenarios grew progressively more challenging, forcing us to apply multiple skills simultaneously while under time pressure. Communication proved to be one of the most critical skills. Infantry warfare required constant coordination between squad members, with information about enemy positions, ammunition status, casualty reports, and tactical changes passed quickly and accurately through the unit. We practiced using Vox equipment, hand signals, and verbal commands until communication became automatic rather than conscious effort. The Vox casters were similar to those used in the factory for receiving orders and announcements, but military models were designed for two-way communication and battlefield durability. Learning proper Vox protocol was essential for survival, since misunderstood or delayed communications could result in friendly fire incidents or tactical failures that would cost lives. My squad leader was Conscript Yelena Voss, a former atmospheric systems supervisor whose leadership experience in civilian life translated well to military responsibilities. She had the ability to make quick decisions under pressure and to communicate those decisions clearly to the rest of the squad. Under her guidance, our squad began to function as a cohesive unit rather than a collection of individuals. The fourth week introduced us to heavier weapons and specialized equipment. Some conscripts showed aptitude for crew-served weapons like heavy bolters or mortars, while others were selected for training with demolitions or communications gear. These specializations would determine final assignments and influence our chances of survival in different types of combat. I was assigned to remain with standard infantry equipment, carrying a las rifle and basic combat gear. This was the most common assignment, reflecting both my test scores and the Guard's constant need for reliable riflemen who could perform standard infantry missions. Specialized roles were important, but the backbone of Imperial military power remained the individual soldier with basic weapons and the training to use them effectively. Equipment maintenance became a major focus during this period. We learned to repair damaged weapons under field conditions, to improvise solutions when proper replacement parts were unavailable, and to maintain functionality even when equipment was subjected to environmental stresses that exceeded design specifications. The training became more realistic as we progressed. Live fire exercises with actual ammunition replaced the training lasers. Combat scenarios included simulated casualties, forcing us to continue missions while dealing with wounded squad members. Sleep deprivation and limited rations created stress that approximated combat conditions. During one particularly challenging exercise, we were required to assault a fortified position while carrying full equipment loads and operating on minimal sleep. The scenario included obstacles that required teamwork to overcome, enemy positions that had to be eliminated through coordinated fire, and casualties that required immediate medical attention while maintaining combat effectiveness. I found myself moving with practiced efficiency, following procedures that had become automatic through repetition. The las rifle felt natural in my hands now, an extension of my body rather than an unfamiliar tool. My squad moved with collective purpose, each member understanding their role and responsibilities without requiring detailed instructions. The exercise was successful, but the cost was evident in our physical and mental exhaustion. Several conscripts required medical attention for injuries sustained during the assault. Others showed signs of stress reactions that would require monitoring during future training. The instructors noted these results with the same dispassionate efficiency that had marked every aspect of our military processing. Combat medical training occupied the fifth week. Every conscript learned basic first aid techniques that could be applied to battlefield injuries. The instruction was practical and graphic, using training aids that accurately represented the types of wounds commonly sustained in infantry combat. We learned to stop bleeding, treat shock, stabilize broken bones, and evacuate casualties under fire. The medical training was more disturbing than weapons instruction had been. Seeing simulated injuries, even those created with training mannequins and artificial blood, forced us to confront the physical realities of warfare in ways that target shooting had not. The possibility of sustaining these injuries ourselves, or of treating them in wounded squad members, became impossible to ignore. I struggled with the medical training initially. The sight of simulated wounds triggered unexpected nausea and anxiety. However, repeated exposure and practical necessity overcame these reactions. The skills were too important for survival to be abandoned because of personal discomfort, like shooting at human-shaped targets. Treating wounds required mental compartmentalization that separated technical requirements from emotional responses. The final week of basic training combined all previously learned skills in comprehensive combat exercises. We conducted simulated missions that included infiltration, assault, defense, and withdrawal phases. The scenarios were designed to test our ability to function as soldiers rather than conscripts, to react to unexpected situations with trained responses rather than panic. During these exercises, something fundamental had changed in how we moved and thought. The hesitation that had marked our early training was gone, replaced by automatic responses that bypassed conscious decision-making. When targets appeared, we fired. When orders were given, we obeyed. When casualties occurred, we continued the mission. The transformation felt complete, though I could not identify the exact moment when it had happened. Graduation from basic training was marked by a brief ceremony attended by officers whose names and ranks meant nothing to us. We stood in formation while speeches were delivered about duty, honor, and service to the Emperor. The words were formal and impersonal, acknowledging our completion of training without celebrating individual achievement. We had become what the Imperium required, functional components ready for installation in the great machine of war. Our assignments were distributed immediately after the ceremony. Individual orders sealed in regulation envelopes containing destination coordinates and reporting instructions. Some conscripts were assigned to garrison units on peaceful worlds, where their service might consist largely of routine patrols and ceremonial duties. Others received postings to active combat zones, where life expectancy was measured in weeks rather than years. I opened my envelope with hands that remained steady despite the knowledge that its contents would determine whether I lived or died. The orders were brief and precise. Report to Subsector Command Station Gamma 77 for immediate reassignment to active combat unit. Transportation departs 600 standard. No personal effects authorized. The destination meant nothing to me, but the term active combat unit carried clear implications. I would be fighting within days or weeks of arrival. The training was over, and the purpose for which it had been designed was about to be tested in circumstances where failure meant death rather than reassignment. That final night in the training facility, I lay on the familiar bunk and tried to comprehend what had happened over the past 6 weeks. The worker who had stood at Station 47 seemed like someone from another lifetime, a person whose concerns and routines belonged to a different universe. The conscript who would board the transport tomorrow was someone I recognized but did not entirely understand. The other conscripts dealt with their final night in various ways. Some wrote letters to families they might never see again, though mail delivery to active combat zones was unreliable at best. Others gathered in small groups to share stories from their previous lives, creating connections that would soon be severed by different assignments. A few lay silent and still, perhaps trying to preserve whatever peace they could find before facing whatever awaited them. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams that mixed factory imagery with battlefield scenes drawn from training exercises. I stood at Station 47 feeding ammunition into weapons that fired themselves. I marched through corridors that led to trenches filled with bodies. I wore uniforms that shifted between worker coveralls and burial shrouds without warning or explanation. The transport arrived precisely at 600, a massive vehicle designed to carry troops across interplanetary distances in cramped but functional conditions. The interior was configured for maximum efficiency rather than comfort, with acceleration couches arranged in rows and minimal storage space for personal equipment. Most of our gear had been issued at the training facility and would travel separately to our destinations. I found myself assigned to Couch 17, Row C, surrounded by conscripts whose destinations and fates I would never know. The woman beside me was reporting to a penal legion, her orders marked with notation codes that suggested previous infractions. The man across from me carried orders for an armored regiment, his demonstrated aptitude with vehicles having earned him a potentially less dangerous assignment. The transport's engines produced a deep vibration that made conversation difficult and sleep nearly impossible. We traveled in relative silence, each absorbed in private thoughts about what awaited us at our destinations. The journey would take several days, providing time to contemplate the transition from civilian life to military service to active combat. Through small viewports, I watched familiar stars disappear behind us as we traveled toward regions of space I had never imagined visiting. The transport followed trade routes that connected imperial worlds, stopping at way stations where supplies were loaded and passengers transferred to different vessels. Each stop took us further from anything familiar and closer to the vast conflicts that defined existence in the 41st millennium. At the third way station, my orders were updated with new information. Subsector Command Station Gamma 77 had been overrun by forces identified only as hostile Xenos. My reassignment was redirected to Forward Operating Base Tertius on the world of Kithara Prime, where guard units were conducting pacification operations against unspecified enemies. The change meant nothing to me practically, since I had no knowledge of either destination. However, the casual way in which major strategic disasters were communicated suggested that such reversals were common. Entire worlds could fall while transport ships were in transit, their passenger manifests redirected to wherever surviving Imperial forces required reinforcement. The final leg of our journey was completed aboard a military cargo hauler that carried troops, equipment, and supplies to active combat zones. The vessel was designed purely for function, with no attempt at comfort or morale considerations. We were cargo being delivered to where we were needed, and the efficiency of that delivery was the only consideration that mattered. Forward Operating Base Tertius occupied a plateau on Kithara Prime's northern continent, surrounded by terrain that provided good fields of fire in all directions. The installation was temporary but substantial, with prefabricated structures that could be erected quickly and dismantled when the tactical situation changed. Guard units rotated through the base as operations demanded, creating a constant flow of arriving and departing forces. I was assigned to 2nd Platoon, Alpha Company, 43rd Cadian Infantry Regiment. The unit designation meant little to me, but the other soldiers treated it with pride that suggested distinguished service history. The 43rd had fought in conflicts across the subsector, earning battle honors that were displayed prominently in the unit's command post. My squad leader was Sergeant Corvain, a veteran whose scarred face and missing left eye testified to extensive combat experience. He examined my training records with the kind of attention that suggested he understood how to keep new soldiers alive long enough to become useful contributors to the unit's effectiveness. "Factory worker," he noted, reading from my file. "Good. You understand machinery and following procedures. Combat is just machinery with different moving parts, and the procedures are designed to keep you breathing long enough to learn the job." The squad consisted of 12 soldiers, including myself as the newest replacement. The others had served together for periods ranging from several months to over 2 years, creating bonds forged through shared danger and mutual dependence. I was the outsider, the unknown quantity whose performance would determine whether I was accepted or merely tolerated. Combat operations began immediately. The enemy on Kithara Prime was described as local insurgent forces with possible Xenos support, which provided little useful information about their capabilities or intentions. Our mission was to conduct patrol sweeps through suspected enemy territories, identifying hostile positions and eliminating resistance where encountered. The first patrol was scheduled for the morning after my arrival. Sergeant Corvain provided a brief tactical overview while we prepared equipment and conducted final weapons checks. The area of operations covered approximately 20 kilometers of broken terrain where enemy forces had been reported by reconnaissance units. Our objective was to confirm enemy presence and engage targets of opportunity. I checked my Lazrafal with the automatic precision that 6 weeks of training had ingrained. Clean, loaded, safety engaged, spare power packs secured in proper position. The weapon felt familiar now, a tool whose operation was as natural as breathing. The rest of my equipment was equally familiar: field pack, water supplies, medical kit, entrenching tool, and various items whose purposes had been drilled into memory. The squad moved out at 500, before dawn provided light that might reveal our position to enemy observers. We advanced in standard formation, with scouts ahead, main body following, and rear guard maintaining security behind us. Communication was minimal and conducted through hand signals that prevented audio detection by hostile forces. Kythara Prime's landscape was harsh and unforgiving. Rocky outcroppings provided cover but channeled movement along predictable routes. Vegetation was sparse and offered little concealment. The terrain favored defenders who could establish positions with good fields of fire while forcing attackers to advance across open ground. We had been moving for 3 hours when the first contact occurred. Automatic weapons fire erupted from concealed positions approximately 200 meters to our front, forcing the squad to seek cover among the rocks and sparse vegetation. The sound of incoming rounds was different from training exercises, carrying a lethality that simulated ammunition could not replicate. Sergeant Corvain's voice crackled through the Voxnet with calm authority. Contact front. 2 or 3 automatic weapons. Corporal Thane, take your fire team left and flank. Squad, suppress the firing position until flanking element is in position. I found myself crouched behind a boulder that provided adequate protection while allowing me to observe the enemy position. Muzzle flashes from the hostile weapons created clear target references, and I began engaging with aimed fire that had become automatic through weeks of repetitive training. The las rifle bucked against my shoulder with each shot, sending focused energy toward enemies I could not see clearly. The firefight lasted approximately 10 minutes. Corporal Thane's flanking maneuver succeeded in forcing the enemy to abandon their position, leaving behind equipment and bloodstains that suggested casualties from our suppressive fire. We advanced cautiously to clear the area, following procedures that prioritized security over speed of movement. The abandoned position contained evidence of recent occupation but no bodies. Blood trails led away into terrain that offered numerous concealment opportunities, suggesting that wounded enemies had been evacuated by surviving comrades. We collected abandoned equipment and documented the contact for intelligence analysis, then continued with our patrol mission. I had fired my weapon at human targets for the first time, possibly killing or wounding people whose faces I had never seen and whose motivations I did not understand. The act felt neither triumphant nor traumatic, simply necessary for mission completion and squad survival. Training had prepared me to function effectively, without emotional complications that might interfere with combat performance. The patrol continued for 6 more hours without additional enemy contact. We covered our assigned area thoroughly, documenting suspected enemy positions and potential routes of approach that might be used for future operations. The mission was completed successfully according to standard criteria, and we returned to base with useful intelligence about enemy activities in our sector. That evening, Sergeant Corvain conducted a patrol debrief that analyzed our performance and identified areas for improvement. My conduct during the firefight was noted as satisfactory, meeting basic standards for new soldiers while avoiding mistakes that might have endangered the squad. I had become functionally competent, capable of performing assigned duties without requiring excessive supervision. The routine of patrol operations continued day after day. Morning briefings, equipment preparation, movement to assigned areas, contact with enemy forces, engagement according to tactical procedures. Return to base, evening debriefings. The pattern was similar to factory work in some ways, requiring consistent performance of practiced skills while maintaining quality standards that could mean the difference between success and failure. Combat became normalized through repetition. The initial shock of enemy fire was replaced by trained responses that functioned without conscious thought. Loading, aiming, firing, reloading, moving between positions, coordinating with other squad members, treating wounded comrades. The actions were mechanical, performed with the same unconscious competence that had once characterized factory work. After 2 weeks of patrol operations, casualty replacement became necessary. Private Kellum was killed by sniper fire during a routine sweep, his death occurring so suddenly that he had no opportunity to call for assistance or provide intelligence about the enemy position. One moment he was advancing with the squad, The next, he was motionless on the ground with a smoking hole through his chest. I helped carry his body back to base, following procedures that treated human remains with military efficiency rather than emotional ceremony. Kellam's personal effects were collected and prepared for shipment to his family. His identification tags were forwarded to regimental headquarters for record-keeping, and his equipment was cleaned and reissued to incoming replacements. The replacement arrived the next day. A young woman from the industrial sectors of a hive world whose name I never learned, carrying orders that assigned her to our squad as a standard rifleman. She looked exactly as I had looked 3 weeks earlier, uncertain, undertrained, and acutely aware that her survival depended on learning quickly from soldiers who had no time for extended instruction. Sergeant Corvain assigned her to the same position that Kellam had occupied, operating the squad's Vox equipment in addition to her rifleman duties. I watched her struggle with equipment that was still unfamiliar and procedures that she had practiced but never applied under combat conditions. Her movements were hesitant where they needed to be automatic, her responses delayed where they needed to be immediate. During her first patrol, she nearly compromised our position by inadvertently activating the Vox transmitter at the wrong frequency, creating electronic noise that might have been detected by enemy monitoring equipment. The mistake was corrected quickly, but it served as a reminder that new soldiers were vulnerabilities until they gained experience that could only be acquired through survival. She was killed during her second week with the squad. An improvised explosive device detonated during a routine movement, sending shrapnel through her torso that caused massive internal trauma. She lived long enough for me to apply field medical training, but the wounds were beyond treatment with available resources. She died asking for her mother, whose face she would never see again. Another replacement arrived the following day. The cycle continued with mechanical precision that reduced individual deaths to administrative inconveniences. Soldiers died. New soldiers arrived. Operations continued without interruption. The war consumed human beings at a steady rate, requiring constant replenishment from training facilities that processed civilians into military resources. I began to understand that survival was largely random. Skill and training provided some advantage, but ultimately death came to careful soldiers and careless ones, experienced veterans and new replacements, heroes and cowards alike. The enemy's weapons did not discriminate based on courage or competence. They killed whoever was in the wrong place when the trigger was pulled. This understanding changed how I approached combat operations. I continued to follow procedures and maintain equipment standards, but I stopped believing that perfect performance would guarantee survival. The best I could do was function effectively as part of the squad, while accepting that each patrol might be my last. The war on Kithara Prime continued without resolution or clear progress. Territory changed hands regularly, with Imperial forces advancing during some operations and withdrawing during others. Victory and defeat became meaningless concepts, replaced by the simple requirement to continue fighting until ordered otherwise, or until death made continuation impossible. Supply shipments arrived irregularly, bringing ammunition, rations, and replacement personnel to maintain unit effectiveness. The shipments also brought news from other fronts, usually bad news about defeats, retreats, or entire worlds lost to enemies whose nature and motivations remained unclear. The larger war was too vast for individual soldiers to comprehend, and our role within it was too small to have strategic significance. After 2 months of combat operations, I received notification that I had been selected for promotion to acting corporal, pending completion of additional training requirements. The promotion was based on survival rather than exceptional performance, since experienced soldiers were becoming scarce enough to have value, regardless of their leadership capabilities. The promotion meant additional responsibilities but no significant change in daily routine. I would lead a fire team of 4 soldiers, coordinate their movement during operations, and make tactical decisions that might keep them alive or get them killed. The authority was limited, and the consequences were absolute. My fire team included 2 recent replacements and 1 soldier who had served with the regiment for 8 months, making him a veteran by current standards. We functioned as a sub-unit within the larger squad structure, performing reconnaissance, flanking maneuvers, and specialized missions that required small unit tactics. The new soldiers looked to me for guidance with the same desperate hope that I had once directed towards Sergeant Corvain. They wanted to believe that experience could be transmitted through instruction, that survival techniques could be learned before they were needed. I provided what guidance I could, while knowing that nothing I taught them would guarantee their continued existence. The war ground on through seasons that meant nothing to soldiers who lived in underground shelters and fought battles that gained or lost meaningless patches of terrain. Time was measured by patrol cycles and casualty reports rather than calendar dates. The past consisted of previous firefights. The future extended only until the next mission briefing. Letters from home arrived occasionally, carrying news from a world that seemed increasingly foreign and irrelevant. The factory where I had once worked was now producing weapons instead of manufactured goods. Workers I had known had been conscripted into other guard units, their fates unknown and probably unknowable. The life I had once lived belonged to someone else entirely. I wrote no letters in return. There was nothing to say that would not be censored by military authorities, and no one remained who would understand what I had become. The worker who had stood at Station 47 was dead, replaced by someone whose existence was defined entirely by the requirements of warfare. Winter brought changes in enemy tactics and increased casualty rates among Imperial forces. The hostile forces had learned to exploit weather conditions that reduced visibility and limited air support operations. Ambushes became more frequent and more effective, taking advantage of terrain features that were obscured by snow and ice. My fire team was reduced to 3 soldiers after Private Kelliot was killed by artillery fire during a withdrawal operation. His replacement lasted 6 days before succumbing to wounds sustained in a firefight that gained our forces approximately 50 meters of worthless ground. The next replacement survived 3 weeks, long enough to become useful before a sniper's bullet ended his contribution to the war effort. The mathematics of attrition were inescapable. Each operation cost lives that could not be easily replaced, while enemy forces seemed to possess unlimited ability to replenish their losses. The strategic situation was deteriorating gradually but consistently, with Imperial forces maintaining positions through increasingly desperate defensive measures. Orders arrived in late winter directing our company to participate in a major offensive operation designed to break enemy resistance in our operational sector. The attack would involve multiple guard regiments supported by armored units and airstrikes, representing the largest Imperial operation on Kithara Prime in over a year. The offensive preparations included intensive briefings about enemy positions, detailed study of terrain features, coordination with supporting units, and final equipment inspections. Everything possible was done to ensure mission success, but everyone understood that success would come at a cost, measured in casualties that might include any or all of us. I spent the night before the offensive writing a final letter to no one in particular, documenting thoughts and observations that seemed important to preserve, even though no one would ever read them. The letter described what it felt like to be drafted, trained, and sent to war by an imperium that viewed human beings as expendable resources in conflicts too vast for individual comprehension. The offensive began at dawn with artillery preparation that was supposed to neutralize enemy defensive positions. The bombardment continued for 30 minutes, filling the air with smoke and debris that obscured visibility, while hopefully destroying hostile weapons and fortifications. When the barrage lifted, infantry units advanced across terrain that had been reduced to smoking craters and scattered rubble. My fire team moved as part of the company's main assault, following practiced procedures while adapting to unexpected obstacles and enemy responses. The attack proceeded according to plan initially, with Imperial forces advancing steadily through the outer defensive positions. Resistance was lighter than anticipated, suggesting that the artillery preparation had been effective. The enemy counterattack came when we had penetrated approximately 2 kilometers into their territory. Hidden positions that had survived the bombardment opened fire simultaneously, creating overlapping fields of destruction that caught our forces in exposed positions with limited cover. The carefully planned advance became a desperate struggle for survival, as units were pinned down by concentrated fire from multiple directions. I found myself separated from the rest of my fire team, taking shelter in a shell crater while enemy fire swept the area around my position. The Voxnet carried confused reports of casualties and unit locations, painting a picture of an operation that was rapidly disintegrating into chaos. Orders contradicted previous orders, positions were reported as captured and then abandoned. Casualty figures climbed steadily without corresponding progress toward mission objectives. The battle continued throughout the day, with Imperial forces unable to advance further but unwilling to abandon positions that had been purchased with heavy losses. As darkness fell, the decision was made to consolidate current positions and resume the attack the following morning, assuming that surviving units retained sufficient combat effectiveness to continue operations. During the night, enemy infiltrators penetrated our lines and established positions that dominated key terrain features. The renewed attack was stopped before it could develop momentum, with leading elements taking casualties that eliminated their ability to continue offensive operations. By midday, the entire offensive had been called off, and surviving units were ordered to withdraw to their original positions. The withdrawal was conducted under enemy fire that continued until our forces reached defensive positions that provided adequate protection. Casualty evacuation required multiple trips across open ground exposed to hostile observation, with medical personnel and stretcher bearers taking losses while attempting to recover wounded soldiers. When the final casualty reports were compiled, the offensive had cost our regiment 37% of its effective strength in exchange for no permanent territorial gains. The enemy positions we had attacked remained in hostile hands, and their defensive capabilities had been enhanced by captured Imperial equipment and intelligence about our tactical procedures. My fire team no longer existed as a functional unit. All 3 soldiers had been killed or wounded during the failed attack, leaving me as the sole survivor of a group that had once shown promise of becoming an effective combat element. I was reassigned to another fire team that had sustained similar losses, creating a composite unit from the remnants of multiple decimated squads. The war continued with reduced intensity, while both sides recovered from losses sustained during the offensive. Patrol operations resumed on a limited basis, but major attacks were postponed until reinforcements could be brought in to replace casualties that had exceeded sustainable levels. The front stabilized along lines that represented no strategic advantage to either side. Mail delivery resumed sporadically, bringing news from home that seemed increasingly irrelevant to soldiers whose entire existence was circumscribed by immediate survival requirements. The factory where I had once worked had been converted to military production, its workers now manufacturing ammunition for weapons like the one I carried. The irony was noted, but not dwelt upon. I began to realize that the war would continue indefinitely, consuming soldiers at a rate that required constant replacement while achieving no resolution that would justify the expenditure of human resources. We were components in a machine whose purpose was its own operation rather than any external objective. The understanding brought neither despair nor acceptance, only a kind of hollow recognition that this was the reality of existence in the 41st millennium. The Imperium required warfare to maintain its cohesion, and warfare required soldiers to maintain its intensity. Individual lives were fuel for a fire that had burned for 10,000 years, and would continue burning long after everyone currently alive had been consumed. Spring brought new offensive preparations and fresh conscripts to replace winter casualties. The replacement soldiers looked exactly as I had looked a year earlier, uncertain, undertrained, and desperately hoping that experience could be acquired without fatal mistakes. I provided what guidance I could while knowing that most of them would be dead within weeks. The cycle continued with mechanical inevitability. Training transformed civilians into soldiers. Combat transformed soldiers into casualties. New civilians were conscripted to replace the losses. The machinery of warfare operated with perfect efficiency, converting human potential into strategic objectives that remained eternally out of reach. I no longer remembered what Marcus Kellion, the factory worker, had hoped for or feared. That person belonged to a different lifetime, one that had ended the day his name was called during conscription processing. The soldier who remained carried the same name but none of the same concerns or aspirations. The next offensive was scheduled for early summer, when weather conditions would favor mechanized operations and air support. Intelligence reports suggested that enemy forces had been reinforced during the winter months, but Imperial Command remained confident that superior firepower would overcome defensive advantages. We prepared for the attack with the same thoroughness that had marked the previous failed offensive. Equipment was cleaned and tested, tactics were reviewed and rehearsed, coordination with supporting units was established and verified. Everything possible was done to ensure success, while everyone understood that success would require sacrifices that might include their own lives. The night before the attack, I lay in my shelter listening to the sounds of an army preparing for battle. Weapons being loaded, equipment being secured, soldiers whispering prayers to the Emperor or to gods whose names were forbidden but not forgotten. The sounds were familiar now, as much a part of my environment as the factory machines had once been. I thought about the morning when my life had ended and my service had begun. The transition had seemed sudden and traumatic at the time, but now I understood that it had been inevitable. The Imperium required soldiers, and I had been available for conscription. My previous life had been preparation for this moment, when individual existence would be offered up to serve needs too vast for personal comprehension. The attack would come at dawn. Some of us would survive to fight again, others would join the countless dead who had preceded us into Imperial service. The war would continue regardless of individual outcomes, consuming new conscripts who were already being processed in training facilities across the galaxy. I checked my Lazrafil one final time, ensuring that it was ready for whatever the morning would bring. The weapon was clean, loaded, and familiar in my hands. It had become the most important tool in my existence, the instrument through which I served the Emperor and the Imperium. Somewhere in the distance, artillery pieces were being positioned for the dawn barrage that would signal the beginning of another offensive. The shells they would fire had been manufactured in factories like the one where I had once worked, by conscripts like the one I had become. The cycle was perfect and complete, connecting every aspect of Imperial existence to the eternal requirement for warfare. Dawn was still hours away, but already I could hear the enemy moving in their positions, preparing their own responses to our inevitable attack. They would fight with the same desperate efficiency that we would bring to the assault, each side struggling to survive in a conflict that served purposes beyond their understanding. This was what it meant to be drafted in the 41st millennium, to be selected for service that would consume everything you had been and replace it with something useful to the Imperium's endless hunger for warfare. The process was efficient, necessary, and absolutely without mercy for individual hopes or fears. The Emperor protects, we were taught to say, but protection came only through service, and service meant accepting that your life belonged to something larger than yourself. The factory worker I had been was dead. The soldier I had become would die as well, probably soon, but the Imperium would endure, fed by an endless stream of conscripts who would learn what I had learned and accept what I had accepted. In the darkness before dawn, listening to the sounds of approaching battle, I finally understood what I had become. Not a person with hopes and dreams, but a function within a system that converted human lives into strategic outcomes. The understanding brought no peace, only the recognition that peace was a luxury the 41st millennium could not afford. The war would continue. It always did.